Hi developers, and welcome to this video. So in this video, we're gonna see how we can work with namespaces in Kubernetes. But first of all, let's understand what are namespaces in Kubernetes. So namespaces in Kubernetes is a way or a mechanism that we can use to create and isolate different group of resources in a single Kubernetes cluster. So let's say, for example, that we are many teams working on a single Kubernetes cluster. So we can create a namespace for each team. In each namespace, we will have a group of a Kubernetes object like pods, services, deployment, created and managed by a specific team. So the main purpose of namespaces is to create isolated group of resources in a single Kubernetes cluster. So first of all, we will see how we can list all the namespaces that we have in a Kubernetes cluster. For that, we use the kubectl command, kubectl get namespaces. So any Kubernetes cluster will have these four namespaces. To create our own namespace, we can use the kubectl create namespace, and then we specify the name of the namespace. For example, I will choose team A. So team A will be used as the name of the namespace. Let's press enter. Let's display the namespaces again. So we have these four namespaces and a new namespace created 8 seconds ago. Another way to create a namespace is using YAML file. So here we're gonna create a team B namespace.yaml. So here we will write the configuration needed to create a namespace. So we start with the API version, which is v1, then kind. So here we specify the name of the Kubernetes object that we will create. So here we have namespace, and then we have the metadata section. So for the name, I will call this namespace team B. And now we will use this YAML file to create a namespace called team B. Okay, so let's go back to the terminal. Here we will use the kubectl create command. And here we specify the name of the YAML file, which is team B namespace.yaml. So here we have a new namespace called team B created. Now let's see how we can create a Kubernetes object in a specific namespace. By default, if we don't specify the namespace, so the Kubernetes object that we create will be in the default namespace. Okay, so for example here, if we add a new YAML file, let's call it nginx pod.yaml. Here we're gonna create the configuration needed to deploy an nginx pod. So we have API version, v1, and then kind. So here we will create a pod, and then in the metadata section, we will specify the name of the pod. I'm gonna call it nginx pod. We can add some labels. So for example, I'm gonna add these labels, app, my app, and type frontend. Now let's go to the spec section. Here we have the containers section. So here we will create only one container using the nginx image, and we will give this container a name, for example, nginx container. Now let's save this file and go back to the terminal. So to deploy a pod using this configuration file, we will use the kubectl create -f, and then we specify the name of the YAML file. Here we call it nginx pod.yaml. Let's press enter. So an nginx pod was created, and this pod belongs to the default namespace. Okay, if you want to deploy a pod to a specific namespace, you have to specify the name of this namespace. For example, if we want to deploy this pod in the team A namespace, we're gonna use again kubectl create -f nginx pod.yaml, and then we specify the name of the namespace. So here we're gonna deploy this pod in the team A namespace. So this new nginx pod belongs to the team A namespace. If we list all the pods in the default namespace, so kubectl get pods, here in the default namespace, we still have only one nginx pod, because this new pod belongs to the team A namespace. And if we list the pods that we have in the team A namespace, we're gonna find an nginx pod. Here we have the nginx pod that we created using this command. So that's a way to specify the namespace that we want to use. And we can also specify the name of the namespace in the YAML file. So for example, let's say that we want to create an nginx pod in the team B namespace. So here we're gonna create a new configuration file. I'm gonna call it team B nginx pod. So I'm gonna take the configuration that we made in the nginx pod.yaml, and I'm gonna paste it here. So we're gonna use the same configuration file, just we want to call this pod team B nginx pod. So here we just change the name of the pod, and to specify the name of the namespace that we want to use for this pod, we're gonna add here namespace, and here we specify the name of the namespace that we want to use. For example, here we want to create a pod in the team B namespace, so I'm gonna choose the team B namespace. Now we're gonna use this configuration file to deploy the nginx pod. So kubectl create -f. Here we're gonna use team B nginx pod. So here, because we have specified the name of the namespace in the configuration file, we don't need to specify the name of the namespace here using namespace equal the name of the namespace. Okay, because we have already specified the name of the namespace in the configuration file. So let's press enter. Here the created nginx pod belongs to the team B namespace. Let's verify that using kubectl get pods, So in the default namespace, we still have only the nginx part. In the team A namespace, we still have also only one nginx part. Now let's check the team B namespace. So here we have the team B nginx pod created using this configuration file. Okay, so we have two methods to specify the name of the namespace. Either we specify the namespace inside the configuration file using this namespace option, or we can specify the name of the namespace when we execute the command using the namespace argument. So here we have worked with pods, but it is the same story if we work with deployment or services or any other Kubernetes object. And finally, we will see how we can delete namespaces that we don't need anymore. So let's first of all see the namespaces that we have. So kubectl get namespaces. So by default, we have these 4 namespaces, and we have created the team A and team B namespaces. For example, if we want to delete the team B namespace, we use kubectl delete namespace, and then we specify the name of the namespace. Here we're gonna delete the team B namespace. So we execute the command kubectl delete namespace team B. So by executing this command, we will delete the team B namespace. Now let's verify that the team B namespace was deleted. So we list the namespaces again. Here we don't see anymore the team B namespace. A very important thing that you have to know is that when we delete the namespace, we delete all the Kubernetes object that belong to this namespace. So for example, here by deleting the team B namespace, we have deleted also the team B nginx pod. When you delete a namespace, all the Kubernetes objects that belong to this namespace will be deleted. So I hope that you understood the purpose of namespaces in Kubernetes, and thank you very much.